Ooh, the spooky holiday is upon us, so why not check out the spooky classic game series? With all the controversy and mobs of torch-wielding parents that came in its wake, it would be easy for a younger gamer to think that Mortal Kombat was the first game to feature lots of violence and gore. However, there were actually quite a few gory games released before Mortal Kombat, and the king among those games was a Namco arcade game called Splatterhouse. Splatterhouse was released in the arcades in 1988, and while it did apparently cause a bit of controversy when it first came out, it was nowhere near what Mortal Kombat would get a few years later. Though to be fair, that's probably only because this game never got nearly as popular as Mortal Kombat. But enough about the controversies, let's actually talk about the game itself now. Splatterhouse is definitely not what you'd call a deep game. What it is a very straightforward side-scrolling beat-em-up, in many ways similar to Sega's arcade classic Altered Beast. And that means simple straightforward levels followed by simple straightforward boss battles. Simple doesn't necessarily translate to boring though, and Splatterhouse is by no means a boring game. Even though it's very basic, the combat is really satisfying, especially when you get a hold of one of the many different weapons. And while the level design is extremely straightforward without much in the way of obstacles, there is actually a fairly big variety of different enemy types. But I'm not gonna lie here, the thing that really sells this game is its amazing style. The gore may have lost its novelty factor these days, but Splatterhouse's presentation still holds up incredibly well in spite of that. The graphics are a great mix of both American and Japanese horror staples. The main character Rick Taylor is, as you can see, a very obvious Jason Voorhees ripoff, and some of the enemies also take inspiration from 80s horror movies. Most of the enemy designs though feel more in line with what you'd find in a horror manga comic. The atmosphere is further enhanced by the game's creepy soundtrack. It has this really unique sound that definitely fits the eerie mood the game is going for. The sound effects are also great. You'll get a variety of different creepy moans from the monsters, and you'll also get the appropriate squishy sounds when you slice and dice them. I haven't really mentioned anything about the game's story, and that's because the game has pretty much the same rescue your girlfriend story as most other games had at the time. Though Rick gets his powers from an ancient sacrificial mask called the Terror Mask instead of magic mushrooms. There is one thing that sets the story of Splatterhouse apart though, so spoiler alert if you for some reason care about that in an almost 30-year-old arcade game. Splatterhouse's big plot twist is that in the end you don't end up rescuing your damsel in distress. Near the end of the game she gets turned into a monster and you're forced to mercy kill her instead. So yeah, that's pretty damn dark for an 80s arcade game. But it's all part of the game's unique identity, which in the end is what earned it its well-deserved place in gaming history. Actually, Splatterhouse shares much in common with its hockey mask-wearing sibling Friday the 13th. It wasn't the first of its kind, nor necessarily the best, but it is very entertaining and it's impossible to deny its historical significance. Splatterhouse was never ported to the Super Nintendo or the Sega Mega Genesis. Where it did make an appearance, however, was on the oft-forgotten third 16-bit option, the TurboGrafx 16. The Turbo might not have been as powerful as Sega's and Nintendo's consoles, but it did have its fair share of really excellent games, and Splatterhouse should definitely be counted among those. Now, like almost all arcade ports at the time, there have been some sacrifices to the presentation. The details in the background graphics have been severely reduced, and most of the sampled sound effects have either been removed or replaced by simplified versions created by the Turbo's sound chip. There's also been a bit of censorship. One of the bosses in the arcade version was an upside-down cross, but this was replaced by a demonic face in the Turbo release. The look of the Terror Mask was also changed from the classic hockey mask design to something more resembling a red skull. So congratulations Namco, now instead of being sued by New Line Cinema you can be sued by Marvel. They also did remove some of the violent content from the game, but honestly I think that had more to do with space limitations than censorship, because there's still plenty of gory things left in the game. Aside from these changes to the presentation and some small tweaks to the level design though, this is pretty much as close to perfect as an arcade port could be at the time. As great as this port was though, it was not actually the first Splatterhouse game to be released on a home console. That particular honor goes to the Famicom game Splatterhouse Wampaku Graffiti. As you can tell from the footage here, this game has a very different style compared to the original. It's more of a light-hearted parody of the Splatterhouse games, very much like what the parodious games are to the Gradius series. With this change in tone, there has also been some changes to the gameplay. The game has been made a lot more fast-paced, and it's more of an action platformer than a classic beat-em-up this time. Naturally, there's still a lot of monsters to slice up with your meat cleaver, which is now the default weapon, but the controls and level design definitely have more of a platformer feel to them. And a very well-playing platformer, I might add, since the controls are both super smooth and super precise. A pretty surprising gameplay element here is that there's actually a simple leveling system. Killing enemies gives you experience points, represented by the number in the upper left corner. And when you get enough experience, you'll get a permanent increase to your life bar. Like I said, it's simple, but it's a nice way of giving you a sense of progression over the course of the game. Now, I'd be a terrible talking about games on the internet person if I neglected to mention this game's wonderful sense of humor. There's of course the adorable super deformed graphics, and the aforementioned parodies of Splatterhouse itself. The real showstealer though are the tons of different horror movie spoofs you'll find in the game. You can barely make the screen scroll without finding a new wink to horror movie fans. And this can be anything from classics like Alien and The Exorcist, to cult favorites like Evil Dead and The Burning. And let's not forget the most horrifying of all the creatures hiding in children's closets. Michael Jackson, ooh! There's really not much bad I can say about One Pack of Graffiti. Maybe the hit detection feels a teeny tiny bit off at times, but that's just an extremely minor nitpick. If you're looking for something fun to import for your Famicom, this is definitely a strong recommendation. Most of the in-game text is even in English. Well, at least if you consider the phrase "be garbage of cesspool" to actually be English. So now the arcade, the TurboGrafx and Nintendo all had their own Splatterhouse game, and up next it was finally Sega's turn. Splatterhouse II, the true sequel to the original arcade game, released exclusively for the Sega Mega Drive in 1992. The sequel takes place 3 months after the end of the original Splatterhouse. The game starts with Rick having a nightmare about the terror mask. The mask informs him that his girlfriend Jennifer didn't really die in the first game. Instead, she was trapped in some sort of Silent Hill-like hell dimension. So, of course, being the loyal boyfriend / blood-hungry maniac that he is, Rick quickly returns to the ruins of the old Splatterhouse mansion to save her. The gameplay of Splatterhouse II returns to the formula of the original game. In fact, it plays more or less identically, with the exact same controls and moveset. I gotta be honest though, the gameplay doesn't feel quite as tight as it did in either version of the first game. The main culprits are the hit detection and the responsiveness of the controls. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that these are bad, but they have taken a noticeable step backwards. However, this is sort of compensated for with some slight improvements to the game design. The level design, while still fairly flat and straightforward, at least has a bit more going on in terms of obstacles and traps to avoid, and the enemies require at least a tiny bit more quick strategic thinking to defeat. Surprisingly, even though it doesn't have to chase after your pocket change this time, the difficulty still feels a bit higher than even the arcade version of its predecessor, though you do get a password feature and unlimited continues. Now, I'm a big fan of a good challenge in my games, and for the most part I like it here too, but there are definitely times where it feels more cheap than challenging, especially the final level, which relies almost completely on pattern memorization. The presentation also has its pros and cons. The first Splatterhouse obviously has a technical advantage being on dedicated arcade hardware, but the sequel does beat it when it comes to variety. You get to explore a bit more of the area outside of the titular house this time, and if you like the weird enemies in the first game, then you're going to absolutely love what this one has to offer. Enemies this time include a big gross wall face, mutant fetuses bungee jumping with their own umbilical cords, and Dr. Manhattan. On the audio side, the soundtrack still keeps a pretty decent level of quality. The sound effects, however, not so much. Well, okay, the standard sound effects are actually fairly good, but the sampled sound effects are more hilarious than they are horrifying. Especially these monsters, which sound less like horrifying nightmare creatures and more like Yeah. Now I know I've been a bit hard on Splatterhouse II here, but honestly, even though it's not quite as good as its predecessor, it's still a really nice game in its own right. Definitely a worthy option if you want something spooky on your Mega Drive. Though you could of course also choose the third and final entry into the trilogy, Splatterhouse III, which was once again released exclusively for the Mega Drive. Splatterhouse III takes place several years after the events of the last two games. Rick and Jennifer are now married and even have a young son named David. Also, despite both of them being debt-ridden college students in the last game, they now live in a mansion that's so huge it would even make Bruce Wayne envious. Well, okay, the game's manual actually heavily implies that they got rich through Wall Street stock trading. And to be fair, someone that regularly dresses up like this and beats things to death with a 2x4 is exactly the kind of person I'd expect to make it big on Wall Street. However, their humble 1%er lifestyle is disturbed when the monsters once again return to cause havoc, this time in their own home. So Rick once again dons the terror mask and sets out to do some American-style home protection. In many ways, Splatterhouse 3 is the best game in the entire trilogy, but it's also the one I enjoy playing the least. I'll explain why soon, but for now let's look at the positive points. Firstly, the game has a lot more depth this time. Instead of the strictly 2D movement in the previous games, you can now move freely in any direction, much like other beat-em-ups like Final Fight or Double Dragon. The simple, straightforward levels have also been replaced by huge, open levels that you can explore completely freely. There's even a handy map which gives you a nice and easy-to-read overview of each floor of the house, so you never have to worry about getting lost either. Rick's moveset has also been expanded with several new attacks, and if you collect special crystals in the levels, you can even transform into a super steroid version of Rick, which will in turn unlock even more special attacks. And of course we can't ignore the graphics, which at least in my opinion are the best in the entire series by far, even better than the arcade version of the original. But one of the most interesting graphical features are the cutscenes, which will appear between and sometimes even during the levels. Instead of using the same graphical style as the rest of the game, these are presented using digitized live-action photographs. Now that might sound more like a cheesy gimmick than anything, but surprisingly they actually managed to pull it off incredibly well. Those grainy black and white pictures combined with the awkwardly translated yet genuinely disturbing script actually get way more under my skin than most modern-day horror games could ever dream of doing. And the cutscenes are also enhanced by the music, which once again does an excellent job of setting the atmosphere. All well and good so far, but like I said before, this game has some really major flaws. So I guess it's time to stop dancing around the issue now. The biggest problem by far is that every single level is on a very strict timer. And unlike most games where you just lose a life and start the level over if the timer runs out, here the consequences are a lot more insidious. You see, running out the timer here doesn't mean that Rick dies. No, instead it means that one of his family members die. So if you want the real ending, you have to beat every single level in time. And considering you quite literally went to hell and back to save Jennifer in the last game, you probably don't want to see her killed by some random monster now. On paper, that might sound like a fairly interesting idea for the time, but there's a really major problem with the execution. And that problem is that the timer is way too strict. It's not so bad that it's impossible to make it in time, but you will have to do everything as fast as you possibly can. Besides the fact that stressing through a game isn't very fun, this also clashes with the open design I talked about before. There's really not much point in having a freely explorable level, if you're always forced to take the fastest possible route anyway. I mean, to make an extreme example here, imagine playing through a game like Elder Scrolls, and then getting punished with a bad ending for not continually walking along a linear dirt path the entire time. And worst of all, it would have been so easy to fix this problem. They could of course just have increased the timer a bit, or better yet, they could have replaced the timer with hidden items required to save your family. That way they could keep the branching story and make use of the open levels. Aside from all this, there's also a pretty major flaw in the combat system, or perhaps exploit is a better word here. You see, while you do have a varied moveset, it's by no means balanced. Most of your attacks are pathetically weak. And then there's the spin kick. The spin kick is easily performed by pressing back, forward and attack. And it's also the most overpowered move in the history of gaming. Not only does it make you completely invincible for like 3 seconds, but any enemy that touches you during those 3 seconds will take about 8 times the damage of a normal punch. So since you're constantly in a hurry, you'll probably end up relying on this attack almost exclusively. And watching that animation over and over again will get pretty tedious in the long run. But if you're willing to work around the issues, then Splatterhouse III still has a lot of things to like about it. It's just a shame it never got to live up to its full potential. Now, with the story of the trilogy brought to a satisfying conclusion, it would be 17 years before we heard from Splatterhouse again. But in 2010 the series was once again brought back, or perhaps I should say resurrected. This game, simply known as Splatterhouse, was not a sequel to the old games, but rather a complete reboot. It sort of follows the story of the original game, but it also deviates from it in many ways. The story is still not super deep, but there is a lot of dialogue between Rick and the Mask during the game. And the voice acting is actually really good, especially the Mask, which is voiced by the legendary voice actor Jim Cummings. When it comes to the gameplay, well, it's the standard 3D beat-em-up formula. You know, you got your light attack, heavy attack, dodge roll, grab, block. So if you've played any other similar game, you know pretty much what to expect here. Though to be fair, there are a couple of extra features. When the Mask has collected enough blood from killed enemies, you'll be able to turn into a super steroid version of yourself, just like in Splatterhouse 3. This will also fully recover your health, which is very important since it's also the only way to recover health. When an enemy is close to death, you can also perform special fatality kills on them. These are nasty and fun the first couple of times you see them, but they grow tedious pretty quickly, so usually I don't even bother with them. One nice feature is that some areas of the game lock you on a 2D plane, giving you a nice little throwback to the gameplay of the original Splatterhouse. They're pretty few and far between, but it's still an appreciated nod to the fans of the classics. When it comes to the graphics, well, they certainly don't push the limits of the PS3 and 360, but they do have a cool atmosphere and they certainly nailed the splatter part of the title. You'll definitely get to paint the town red in a very literal sense here. Rick himself will be visually torn apart as you take damage, and you can even use your own severed arms as weapons. Well, as soon as you have a new arm to pick it up with. The game's soundtrack mostly consists of licensed metal music. It fits nicely with the atmosphere, but I kind of wish there was more original music as well. Outside of the main game, there's also quite a bit of unlockable content. You get combat arenas where you can compete online for global high scores. There's also hidden audio diaries that expand the story, and shall we say risque photos of Jennifer to find. That last one is a bit tacky, but I guess it fits with the game's exploitation movie style. But by far the most worthwhile unlockable is the entire original Splatterhouse trilogy, which includes the only way to play the original arcade game at home, well outside of owning the actual arcade board. And you know, that alone is pretty much worth the price this game is currently going for. Though I should probably also point out that the included version of Splatterhouse 3 has been slightly altered. From what I understand, Namco no longer has the right to use the likeness of the actors from the original, so the cutscenes here use illustrations instead of live-action photos. It doesn't look quite as creepy as the original, but it's fairly close. Splatterhouse 2010 was one of those games that just sort of came and went, and nobody really talks about it anymore. But even though it's by no means a masterpiece, I'd definitely say it's worth a playthrough, especially for fans of the original trilogy. And that's the Splatterhouse series. Definitely a great option if you want something creepy to play during this most evil of holidays. So I hope you have a happy Halogen. And remember kids, always accept candy from strangers.